During the first American Revolution, every single thing that the British did to try to quell the rising tide of consciousness that was calling for independence failed. Every single thing they did, every tax, every martial law implementation, every war against the colonists backfired because every single thing they did just fanned the flames of the rebellion until they had an all-out revolution on their hands. That is exactly what is happening today. There is nothing that the Trump administration can do to generate support at this point, because everything that they do, whatever fiery Nazi-esque speech that they want to give, whatever memorial service, whatever executive order, whatever draconian law that they try to pass, all it succeeds in doing is pissing people off or waking people up or both. Because the energy of revolution is growing over the entire world. And there's nothing that they can do to stop that. Similar to the first American Revolution. So in chapter 4, Zen talks about how the first revolution was really built on a myth. And that myth was that the lower classes had anything in common with the upper classes. And they've been spinning that myth for centuries. They used words like liberty and freedom and our nation and independence in order to generate this emotional response in the lower class people. They created a symbol. The United States has always only ever been a symbol. It's never really been a country. It's always been a corporation. But the symbol, the logo for that corporation has been freedom. And they use that idea, that symbolism of freedom, in order to manipulate the masses. There's so much to unpack in chapter 4. I'm not joking. This is like my 10th time trying to record this video because I don't even know where to start. Like, there's so much to unpack. So, okay. Talking about the parallels between then and now, the British Empire of the 18th century was acting shockingly similar to the Trump regime today. And when they wrote the Declaration of Independence, they wrote down all the grievances they had with the British Empire. I want you to tell me how familiar this sounds. So the list accused the king of dissolving colonial governments, controlling judges, sending swarms of officers to harass our people, sending in armies of occupation, cutting off colonial trade with other parts of the world, taxing the colonists without their consent and waging war against them, transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the works of death, desolation, and tyranny. That last one is given very much Gaza. But the same reason that the colonists had for breaking apart from Britain is the same reason why we in the States today are so horrified and disgusted by the Trump regime. What they're doing is not new. It's just new to us today because we've not seen this type of old world tyranny in our lifetimes. But despite all of the efforts that they're putting in to bring us backward, they're going to fail. Even in the 1700s, as the consciousness level rose and as poor people started recognizing that rich people were their enemies, and that rich people were the rich colonists in particular were the ones that were oppressing them and taxing the hell out of them and raising the rent and forcing them to starve in the streets like dogs. Even in the 1700s, the more that poor people noticed this, rich people couldn't stop them from noticing. Like, they couldn't stop the rise of consciousness. All they could do at the time was control it. And it was a lot easier for the American colonial leaders to control that population than it is for the American leaders today to control this population. They were trying to control maybe about 2 million people, maybe 3 million max. The American government has over 300 million people to contend with right now. And they're not winning. They're not winning. Like, what irritates me so bad is when I see people discounting the extent to which democracy actually has been winning this year, because they're so addicted to fear and they're so addicted to nihilism and defeatism that they're overlooking how much the courts have blocked them from doing stuff. And they're overlooking how much the public tide of backlash and outrage, which by the way just keeps growing bigger and stronger, has been putting belt to ass this entire time. Like I mentioned in my last video, the whole Jimmy Kimmel debacle. Sinclair Group won't last long. I can promise you that. People are like, oh, well, you know, Disney and ABC are inviting him back, but Sinclair's standing strong. Yeah, for how long? I'm telling you that what is happening right now is almost identical to what has happened before, except this time we're doing it better. But here's what we need to pay attention to, and this is a warning. In the 1700s, when the rich started noticing that the poor were coming after them, breaking into their homes, looting, stealing and breaking their furniture, drinking their wine, burning down buildings, busting into courthouses, demanding to be on the jury, creating their own mini governments in their counties and in their small towns. When the rich started realizing that the poor were rising up against them, they decided to distract them with the American Revolution cause. The American Revolution was always a distraction that the rich used to get the poor to fight their battles for them. That's why Howard Zinn calls it a myth. Eventually, the ideals of that myth took on a life of their own, and it's been our North Star for hundreds of years as we work toward a more perfect union. But in the beginning, what they were trying to do was harness the energy of the poor, that passionate, angry, furious energy, and redirect it at the British for their own material gains. They wanted the land and the profits that the British had for themselves, so that they continue that system of financial exploitation, because they didn't want to do away with capitalism. They weren't interested in economic equality. They weren't interested in racial equality, damn sure not interested in gender equality. What they wanted was the money. And what they did was they manipulated the poor into believing that they were all on the same page, but they weren't. And this is when the mass manipulation and propaganda of the American system started. This is when the cognitive dissonance started, because how can you write a document that says all men are created equal? Meanwhile, there were no black people in the room, there were no women in the room, there were no natives in the room, and there were no non-rich white men in the room. From this moment on, from the mid-17th century on, there has been a mobilization of lower class energy by upper class politicians for their own purposes. And that's what we see today when we see these culture wars, when we see every week Republicans are mad at something else and they're always mad. It's because their energy is being harnessed and manipulated by uber rich elites who cannot afford to let them have a moment's peace. Because the moment that they have peace, they start connecting with us and class consciousness starts to rise, which is what's happening right now. Every single thing that they're doing, this whole Charlie Kirk fiasco has been an absolute disaster for them, but they're too arrogant to see it. Because all it's done is wake up hordes of people and make them start to notice how divisive Republicans' rhetoric has been for decades. What chapter 4 has taught me, and I'm going to leave it here. I'm not even gonna, I have been trying to pull this apart. It's just too much. I'm just going to move on to chapter 5. Read the fucking book for yourself. But what chapter 4 has taught me is that energy is real, especially when it's on a mass scale. And what the elites have been extremely successful in is harnessing and using our energy against us. And it's not just the conservatives who are distracted by culture wars. It's also the liberals and leftists who are distracted by puritanical wars. Oh, well, you didn't say this just right. You don't have exactly the right position that aligns with mine perfectly. So I'm going to try to cancel you, and I'm going to invalidate every single thing that you say, and I'm going to fight you, and I'm going to get in your comments, and I'm going to go, well, actually, but actually. The more that we fight each other, the more they win. That's the sentiment. That's the sentiment. Because as soon as they got these poor people to mobilize against Britain and they wrote the Declaration of Independence, they then turned around and forced them into a war draft to go die for their cause. No rich person went and fought in the Revolutionary War. All poor people did. Don't let them fuck with your mind. This is when the propaganda started.